Welcome to the Unit Economics Podcast. I'm Josh Stabinsky.
And I'm Joe Hovde. Today we're speaking with Hankinson and LeAnn Darland, co-founders of Talea Beer Co, one of our favorite breweries here in New York City. We hope you enjoy the episode.
I'm Tara Hankinson. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Talea.
And my name is LeAnn Darland. I'm the other co-founder and the other co-CEO of Talea. So how we got to this place. I grew up in Ohio. I'm a Midwest person. I think the best people are Midwest people. I joined the Navy right out of high school via the Naval Academy. So I went to Annapolis for undergrad and then in exchange for free education, served for 5 years as a signals intelligence officer. The good thing about the Navy is that you're almost always next to a beach. So my home bases were Hawaii and San Diego. And while I was stationed in San Diego, it was around 2013, and it was really like the craft beer boom in the U.S. Like probably the time we should have started a brewery, turns out. But I was definitely enjoying them at the time, and I was surrounded by some incredible breweries like Ballast Point, Stone, Lagunitas. I lived around the corner from Coronado Brewing Company, and I just loved that you could see a product being made right in front of you, and it changed every time you went to the tap rooms. And it was just a nice, casual, communal experience at all of these tap rooms. And we would go quite a bit, my husband and I. And, at that point, it planted a seed in my mind of like, wouldn't it be so cool to have a brewery of my own someday? And I knew nothing about brewing, and really at that time didn't realize that I just had an entrepreneurial itch. Like I would love to have my own coffee shop or my own stationery shop or, just something where you're a part of a community, you interact with people day in and day out, and you have like a physical good that makes people happy. But when the time came to get out of the Navy, I pursued a career in corporate finance, which is what I had studied. And so I moved up to the Bay Area and fortunately landed a job at Google. So I think at that point, there were probably 30,000 employees. So it wasn't much of a startup anymore, but was really a totally different culture, obviously, than the military. And so I was on the finance team there, absolutely loved it. Just after a few years, just realized that one, I didn't have a passion for search algorithms, and really like the coveted role at Google is a software engineer. And two, that it was just such a big company. The work I was doing, it was interesting, but I could not show up to work and everything would be just fine. I was a cog in the wheel. And to get the level of scope and responsibility I really wanted, it would take decades, if ever. At the time, Ruth Porat had come in as the CFO. It's like, okay, well, I'm not really on that trajectory. So I decided to figure out what it would take to get into beer because it was still on my mind. I still loved it. In San Francisco, there were a good amount of breweries, and I would always end up at Rogue randomly had a tap room in, I think it was Russian Hill in San Francisco, and I would always go there whenever possible. But so still loved beer. So I started emailing breweries around San Francisco asking if I could work for them for free because there were so many breweries at that time. And so this was probably like 2016. No one replied. And I now understand why as a business owner. That's just a liability and would take a lot of time and effort. But I did end up starting to homebrew myself and went to get my MBA at Berkeley during the evenings, and then eventually left Google to join a beer e-commerce startup as their head of finance. And that company was called Hopsy. It was based in Berkeley. And at the time, they were just doing growler deliveries to your door. So growlers were still cool then. And it was great. It was a great experience to step into that role because we got exposure to all kinds of local breweries that we would source beer from. But also, I learned the nitty-gritty of a startup that they don't teach you in business school. So, like workers' comp claims and all the liability insurances you have to have, and how to run payroll and all the tax filings associated with that. Um, so that sort of like unsexy stuff, but then also how to raise and how to put a pitch deck together. So we ended up raising a little over 15 million from Heineken, 10 or 15, um, between a couple rounds. And then we moved the headquarters of that company to New York to be closer to Heineken USA and White Plains. When we made that move in 2018, we were expanding the team. We posted a job for head of customer experience, and Tara's application came across my desk. So I saw it. I saw she had an MBA. She was at the New York Times. She worked at PwC, and I was like, okay, well, this is out of our budget. So I moved the resume to the side. But fortunately, our CEO sent it back to me a few days later and was like, hey, did you see this? And I was like, well, yeah, but there's no way we can afford her. He was like, well, just have a conversation with her. And I still remember that conversation. I was like in between Berkeley and New York. I was in the conference room in the upstairs office at Hopsy, and Tara dialed in with her Hermes scarf and a shelf of wine bottles behind her from her apartment. And it was just such a breath of fresh air because there were no other women really working in management at that company. It was a small company, and there aren't many other women in beer. And so to see someone with like such a successful business background who's also kind of looked like me, like I saw someone who looked like me on the other side of the screen, it was really refreshing. And so we upped our budget, but still, like, she took a significant pay cut, and I convinced her to join that company. So that was in April 2018. And within 3 months, we had formed the entity that's now Talea, within 3 months of meeting each other. But that's kind of my half of the story leading up to meeting Tara and kicking off the company.
On my end, before meeting LeAnn, I grew up in Pennsylvania, but both my parents started their careers and lived in New York. They actually met working at the Playboy Club, which used to be on 59th and 5th. My dad was a bartender and my mom was a Playboy Bunny cocktail waitress. And then they stayed in hospitality. Playboy actually paid for my dad's MBA.
I feel like we should just talk about this for the entire show. Like, should we just like pivot and talk about like like Playboy benefits for the entire series?
It's funny because my mom is such a prude. I mean, she's just very proper. So it's very funny for me to imagine her like wearing a velvet bunny costume serving in the VIP room. But that was a ways ago. So growing up, obviously you're not thinking of joining or starting a brewery when you're 12, but you're always thinking about hospitality and setting the table, literally setting the table, making food and things like that. I went to Bucknell for undergrad, also in Pennsylvania, moved to New York City and was working in philanthropy, which was a bit of a dead end for me. So I took some wine classes and decided to go back to business school. And I got a full ride to NYU Stern, where I recruited for consulting. As LeAnn said, I tried my hand in management consulting. But before I started that full-time job, I spent the summer working at Wolfer Estate in the Hamptons, shadowing their office, working under the now CEO. And that was really eye-opening for me because I felt like I loved so many components of their business. I loved the consumers they were able to attract. This was in 2015. And I also was thinking about how that could be applied to beer because I was curious about craft beer, but what ultimately became the hypothesis of our business, which is that craft beer wasn't speaking to me as a consumer. So after that summer, worked in consulting, got laid off, but got a job at the New York Times in the marketing department in the customer experience team, which the Times being a subscription business was perfect for segueing into working at Hopsy with LeAnn. And, it's funny because when we met, it's like, in some ways we have so much in common. We both went to business school. We both had these corporate careers, but we're also kind of a yin and yang of bad cop, good cop. Who's what? I won't say. I'm just kidding. But depends on whose team you're talking
criminal.
to. Yes, exactly. And once we were thinking, let's start a brewery together, we just worked so well together, and it took us what seemed like years, but was really only 9 months to go from that kernel of an idea to building the business plan, getting our first beer ready to package, getting ready to leave our jobs and start fundraising. So we did that in April 2019, quickly got into Whole Foods, quickly had around 100 accounts in New York City doing our own sales and distribution, which at that point was really just a proof of concept, as we always knew that our business model would be based on brick and mortar. So we raised money. Obviously, building construction in New York City during the pandemic took about twice as much as what we thought it would. But that was our first location here in Williamsburg, which is about 9,000 square feet, encompassing our brewery and our first flagship tap room. And now we have 4 other brick and mortars across Brooklyn and Manhattan. So, I mean, we can stop there and dive into any and all, but it's been a really fun educational ride. And we love having the opportunity to save anyone from making the mistakes that we made along the way, which is one reason we're excited to hopefully share some wisdom with your listeners.
Yeah, let's go back to 2018. So something I wanted to touch on is, it seems pretty remarkable to me to go from having just met to within 3 months feeling like, oh, we should form an entity. Can you speak to how you were so confident, how that went, and what you were thinking about at the time? Did you think, oh, the market isn't serving me and we should build this thing? Or was it just, I love working with this person and I know I want to be in business with them?
For me, it was a little of both. I always knew I wanted a brewery. I didn't realize what approach or voice it would have when that happened. That sort of developed over time when we started creating the business plan. But I don't have that many girlfriends. I've been in mostly male-dominated industries, so the fact that I was so drawn to Tara was pretty unique for me. I remember at Hopsy, whenever Tara wouldn't be at work, it was just the mood was down a little bit across everyone. She just has a very infectious, positive, fun presence. And so it's crazy. I mean, we were in our early 30s. We were both married and made what now is obviously a very huge life decision and jumped into this together. I think at the time, though, it was a bit more calculated and it didn't feel so risky. And so it was after I think we have a picture of everything we drank that night. A lot of bottles of wine and a handful of beers that we formed the LLC. And then we were in stealth mode for a good 8 or 9 months while still at Hopsy. So we were able to kind of take it in piecemeal and just meet up at nights or on the weekends and figure out, okay, well, what license is actually needed to do this? And who should we talk to brew this beer? And then building the business plan was where we were really oh, there's a huge opportunity here and we are the perfect people to speak to this segment that's been ignored by craft beer forever. So it's easy to create an entity, and it's easy to meet up a couple times a week. And, we had our own Slack channel on the side. And then I think the big turning point was when we had a beer in hand and realized, oh, someone has to sell this and it kind of has to be us. So now we're going to go to making no money.
You mentioned Whole Foods as one of your first accounts. Could you just talk about kind of what that literally looked like? Who did you email? Did you walk into Whole Foods and talk to someone? What is the process like from going from where you were and having this beer that you created to talking to someone at Whole Foods to proving it out and convincing them? Just what did that look like kind of in concrete steps?
So we went to Cherry Bomb, the media company's Jubilee, which was in March, I think, of 2019, and Whole Foods was one of the sponsors, and they had a big booth, and we had a little I want to say a pamphlet of
Probably
what our beer was going to be, And LeAnn went up to someone and, asked them for their business card and said, we're a woman-owned brewery. We're going to have a first beer package, and followed up via email. And they introduced us to the regional specialty buyer, which encompassed beer. And so when we knew we had a packaging date, we basically set a date for the next day, literally, to drive to their Jersey corporate office and bring samples. And what I would say is, like, ignorance is bliss, because we had no idea what we were doing. So we had obviously printed out our entire pitch deck that we were using to fundraise, which was, 30 slides. And we're sitting down with the buyer, Chris, and we're like going through and being like, see, this is why there is an opportunity in the market. And look at this fact about women. And he's like, listen, you don't need to do this. I'm going to try the liquid. The beer tastes good. I know that women are the majority of our customers. I know that you're going to make this beer tastes great. I get it. So we'll bring you on. We'll buy 2 cases of your first 2 SKUs and put it in our stores. And that's the drop we will facilitate for you. After that, you're on your own. So that was awesome, except we only had 1 SKU and we didn't have basically any packaged beer from that first packaging run.
Oh, but
So
also, so we had the design of the cans of our first 3 beers. And so we brought them all. But the last 2 were filled with basically the last runnings of the brew, which is hop sludge. So he was like ready to try a second one, and we were like, "Oh, no.
this is for
No.
show.
Yeah, you
Not
can't.
today.
You can't
Yes,
drink
that's
that
the
one."
showroom model. So when we did our second run, our first beer that we ever brewed was Sun Up, which is still our best-selling IPA. And when we did the second packaging run, basically we had that and a pale ale, and we had also promised 6-pack boxes. Of course, the contract brewer, co-packer equivalent, didn't have a cartoning machine because this is a very small scale situation. So the delivery windows for Whole Foods are 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. One of us would drive, the other one would sit in the back seat, rolling around, hand packing these 6-pack boxes, refolding them, and sticking them into the case trays. I get really car sick. LeAnn was pregnant. Well, you weren't pregnant at that point, but later in the year,
Yeah.
it was a total mess. But
Ignorance is bliss, though.
yeah, I mean,
mean,
it was fun. It was fun because I think both of us at our core are very physical people, in the sense that, like, creating and touching stuff is what drove us away from the jobs we were in. Like, I'm completely aligned with the New York Times mission. I always wanted to work for a mission-driven company, but there's still something very abstract about the reader, especially since most of their subscribers are digital. I think same thing for LeAnn with Google. It's like, yeah, people are using Google every day. It's a household name, but there's something really amazing about the tangible, literal exchange of goods when you're driving up to a loading dock in, very undesirable locations in
Sure.
a van that can barely,
hey,
reach 50 on the highway.
that van
but
is doing just fine. We still have that van
Yeah.
today.
I would also say, like, very humbling to go door to door selling beer, because we also were selling draft and cans. We cried on a lot of street corners. I'd like call LeAnn or call my husband. He's working his day job, sitting at a finance desk, and I'm like, I can't go in again. I've been rejected twice from this place. But it was like a tastemaker account. We're like, I can do this. I can do this. And that's so humbling, because, you've put so much sweat equity, literal equity, our money into this business, but you're going face to face with someone, and we're not cool beer kids. We're not beer nerds. We're not coming from that heritage, the if you know culture. So we were walking in totally blind. But again, I think just like when you have kids, you think it's going to be fun. Ignorance is bliss. And then you're totally slapped in the face with that reality.
You touched on something that, well, you touched on a few things that I think we want to cover. One being, you already had the design in hand when you went to Whole Foods. Can you speak a bit to the importance of having that, like, relatively fleshed out early on? Did you both come up with the designs? Did you contract that work out? Because I think we're thinking about the beer market is extremely saturated, and obviously you have a very specific mission, but, like, to separate yourself in a store, people are generally just looking at a can and saying like, this looks good, or looking at a price and saying this looks good, right? So can you speak a bit to the importance of the branding? Is that something that you wanted to like key in on early on?
So I think we very early on, one of the first things we did was realize that the visual identity of the brand would be really important, because the DNA of our company was going to be very different than every other, in our opinion, than the existing options on the market. Because like you said, I mean, probably at the time there were 40 great craft breweries in New York City and 8,000, 9,000 across the country, only 2% of which were owned by women. So going back to our vision, which is to expand the craft beer market beyond a typical craft beer drinker, in doing all of our market research, creating our pitch deck and our business plan and our financial pro formas, we had these assumptions that we want to be targeting this area of growth in craft beer, which is new customers entering the market, not selling to the craft beer echo chamber of beer made by craft beer bros for craft beer nerds. And so to reach those customers, we wanted to do something totally different, which is now one of our internal slogans, is totally different, easy to love. And that meant having liquid in the can that was just as good as anything else out there, but also targeting a broader palette. So fruit forward, low bitterness, easy to enjoy, understandable flavors. 80% of our portfolio falls into that. The hospitality forward spaces, which obviously came much later than this initial run. And then the brand identity, which when it comes to packaging, one of the first things we did was reach out to the designer from Wolfer Estate, who I didn't know him, but I knew of him from working there. He had never worked on a beer brand. His name's John Gilsenan. His firm is I Want Design. He took a wild chance on us, basically charged us
No, we can't say that.
a song and a dance, or whatever you'd say. I mean, I think he's such a genuine, authentic, creative person where he was like,
Yeah.
I love this challenge. He had no idea what would come of it. Now we've brewed, over 200 unique beers, and he's made the labels for all of them. And he's one of our, we had him working on a design before we even had a name for the business, but we knew some cornerstones of the brand, which would be like, we want it to be a family of products where everything looks related to each other on the shelf, but each SKU has its own identity. We wanted it to sit in this space between gender neutral, leaning slightly feminine, because of how many lizards and zombies and skulls are on all the craft beer cans. And I could go on, but the point was that we needed a partner to really bring that to life. I think LeAnn and I are kind of like, now and even then, we kind of know it when we see it, whether it's on brand for us, but we're not from a design background. We're from a business background. And I think that's really what also differentiates us, is we're business people who fell in love with beer and want to make a great, profitable product, but we're not beer people. And so we don't benchmark ourselves against other breweries. I don't really care what other breweries are doing, or, what their books look like, or what beers they're making, because we're making beer for a specific customer and approaching this business inspired by so many other things beyond beer, like matcha places and wine bars and the best hospitality establishments in the city. And even going to stores, like I remember going to Glossier's flagship when it first opened, because I was like, I want to see what their store experience is like. Not inspired by a lot of breweries. And so having someone who had never worked on a beer brand before, who's based in London, was like, oh, we can go outside of the box on this one and just blue sky think on what we want the brand to be like, because he wasn't tethered to these sort of typical craft beer notions. He liked beer, but, he was able to get there with us.
Although, I mean, before we started working with John too, we were doing the simple stuff, like paying $50 on 99designs.com and seeing what people would come up with, and we have some of those now still. And it's just funny to see, like, yeah, you should probably pay a professional when you're ready to really take it somewhere. But even some of the first beer names, though, with John, we had a pale ale called Lunch Date, and we loved the name. And he immediately was like, I really do not like it. And
It's really not good.
it is really not good, or very not good, like verbatim. It's burned into our memory. And we doubted ourselves for a while. He was like, it sounds like something a grandmother would drink. And it was probably like a week where we came back and we were like, no, we think like this is true to our brand. And it was inspired by all the lunch meetings Tara and I would have at Hopsy, and sometimes like a nice easy drinking pale ale would be perfect at lunch. So, there was some of that learning too on both sides of him pushing us and us pushing him, which was great.
I love that he's still designing with you. Like, that's such a cool, like, growth for him through the brand. Yeah, that's such a cool thing. You mentioned kind of coming at it not as craft beer insiders, but from a business background. And I'm curious for both of you. So for like the median Googler and the median management consultant, like, what do people most misunderstand about what it is you're doing? Like, what are conceptions they have that are the most off? And then also, like, because I imagine there's a zillion of those. But I'm also curious, like, what actually you did take that was valuable from those things for what you're doing now. Like, what value did you bring from these corporate backgrounds into building Talea?
I think probably the biggest misconception is that we're financially successful. That it's like it's imposter syndrome in a totally different way. Now, instead of like, oh, you work at Google, it's like, oh, I see your beer everywhere. And in my mind, like, the first thing that flashes,
Which is great.
which is true
And true.
and great, but in my mind it's like, yeah, but those margins are shit. And all the things that are going wrong or that we're being challenged with at the time with wholesale is what goes through my mind. And so it's like, yeah, that's great. I'm glad you're seeing it everywhere, but did you buy it?
Yeah.
I don't say that, but sometimes. And like, everyone thinks we drink beer all day, which we taste beers often, but it's kind of like any job that you're in 24/7. Sometimes that's the last thing you want. But for me, taking experience from the corporate world, I think, has really professionalized our business compared to a lot of other breweries. So it's definitely a differentiator. We have benefits for our employees. We do 401k. We do semi-annual performance reviews. And we try to make this a place where people can grow their careers. So, the Navy instilled a lot of discipline and grit and no excuse type mentality in me. And then Google instilled a lot of taking care of your people, making sure there's continuous feedback, making sure the feedback can go up. So it was a good balance. And Tara's a much better people manager than I am, definitely more empathetic. So that's also been a really great balance for creating this company as well. But I think we both value a lot of elements from the corporate world, that like, there's certain things that have to happen to retain good people, but there's also certain things that have to happen to like be profitable. And it's not Camp Talea, which the first few years of operations, we had to adjust a lot because we were probably a little too lax or a little too involved rubbing elbows with, like, literally helping staff wash dishes and pour beers. But I think coming from that background, one, enabled us to raise money. It gave us some legitimacy. And two, has kind of given us discipline that's needed in this industry, especially right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, like LeAnn said, a lot of kind things about me, and I think that she deserves accolades for building, our entire financial backbone of the business, which I would say one of the big pitfalls of our industry being breweries, bars, and restaurants, is that there aren't business people or financial people at the helms. There's a lot of like gut feel or whims or creative types. If you're a chef and you want to start a restaurant, you don't necessarily understand all of the payment terms and how net 14 versus net 30 can impact your business. And so I think the average person I run into from my past is like, oh my gosh, you guys are so brave. And I'm like, I believe we are incredibly risk averse and we are constantly on edge with everything about the business. Like, we're pretty conservative in the way we approach things. I think if we had a different mentality, we would have raised a lot more money and deployed it in a much flashier burning cash method that we've seen a lot of other hockey stick growth businesses do. And that's the opposite of our business, because our healthy unit economics come from brick and mortar, which is incredibly expensive, takes a very long time, and is capital intensive to continue to operate.
And high turnover.
High turnover, a lot of emotional burden for both of us, dealing with the staff. But I think that like the people I meet don't maybe understand the grind. And it's funny because some people will reach out to me and they're like, hey, can you reserve me a table at one of your locations next week? And I'm like, the funny thing is that's not my job, which is fine. But I actually do things that are way more strategic, but then probably 60% of my work is way, way actually lower than that. Like literally plunging toilets, literally coordinating with the rodent guy, or ordering Christmas decorations. So it's like we're
Yeah.
kind of split between the strategic CEO mentality
Yeah.
and then sort of the bitch work that no one else is going to do because we run a really lean team and someone's
Yeah.
got to order, gift card holders, which I did over the weekend.
I think that's a really good lesson for founders, for people who are thinking about founding something, that like so much of the work is going to be like the quote, like dirty jobs.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in your fundraising journey. So I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but were you bootstrapped to start, and would you just speak to the entire fundraising journey? And I know that you're also looking to raise more funding now, and I'm really curious if you could walk us through what the initial fundraising looked like, and then maybe each subsequent stage, and then all the way up to today, and what you're looking to do into the future.
Yeah, so we self-funded when we first got started with the proof of concept. So contract brewing a beer in the Bronx, getting a van, delivering the beer across the city. I'd say in that first like year and a half, we probably lost $150,000 of our own money. And we were like, someday we'll pay ourselves back. And now we wound down that entity. So that's long gone. Again, we knew that was a proof of concept and that the money was really going to be in our own brewery and Taprooms. So the first round, it's tough. Because we knew we needed a lot of money to build in New York City. So we wanted to raise $2 million, but we wanted to keep enough equity for ourselves to make it worthwhile. And so we started with a pretty high pre-money valuation, considering that at the time we hadn't even started selling a beer yet. So we, did our projections and looked out like 4 to 5 years and used that as a valuation. And said, okay, we'll do pre-money valuation of $8 million. This is based on an idea. We talked with a few CPG VCs that totally got what we were doing, but wanted it to be a more scalable wholesale skinny girl for beer play, which we just didn't want to do. Our experience at Hopsy with like hyper growth at all costs. It just wasn't a comfortable operating model for us. So those conversations were really helpful, but they weren't the right investors for this business. So we went to friends, family, and angel investors and literally emailed every email address we had from all the schools we went to, all the jobs we've had, exes, neighbors, our old
parents' friends,
bosses, our parents' friends, our friends, shameless, asking people for money. And since it was such a new venture, we made the minimum investment amount $10,000. So it takes a lot of $10,000 checks to get to $2 million. And so over about a year, we were able to raise 2.1 from about 115 investors. So when we got to a little over 1 million, we were comfortable to sign a lease. And that whole time we're not paying ourselves. So we signed a lease in November 2019. Fast forward through 2020, we needed more money and we had to cut the budget. And so we augmented that first round with an SBA loan for about $1.9 million. So like Tara said, double your timeline, double your budget. Then we opened our doors in March of 2021 to a line out the door, which was great. We couldn't see anyone at the bar still, and everyone was 6 feet apart with masks on, but people were ready to drink. So we had a very successful first year in Williamsburg. So we decided to raise more from pretty much that same pool of investors to build more tap rooms. So by the end of 2020, the end of 2021, I think January 2022, we closed our second round for $3.5 million. And now total number of investors was about 150 on our cap table. So hopefully that won't be a deterrent if anyone ever wants to acquire us. But I mean, you do what you have to do. And there is an advantage of having smaller check sizes because people are less like, they're not knocking on our door every week asking for the exit plan and the ROI and when they're going to get their money back. It's more of like a fun investment for a lot of people. And our investors are amazing. Every time we do an investor update, usually the questions are like, are you having fun? When are you bringing back whatever beer? Like, great job, girls. So it's great. Tara and I still have majority control and are the only board members. So like having the freedom to just report to yourself is priceless. So that was 2022. Then we opened our Cobble Hill Tap Room in the spring of 22. Then we opened West Village and Bryant Park at the end of 2023 and opened a pop-up across from Madison Square Garden at the end of 2024. And we thought, like, okay, we're going to just operate these for 2025. Let's optimize our operations. Let's make sure we're extracting as much profit as possible. Let's expand wholesale a little bit. And then this is really the year that alcohol has struggled. And we've felt that both in wholesale and taproom. So it's been a really challenging year. We're performing better than other beer brands relatively, but not to the projections we had anticipated. We want to expand more. Like, we're not done yet. And we think there's still a ton of opportunity in New York City. So we'll likely raise like another round, possibly a bridge round. We've gone back and forth the last few months on how much we want to raise, who we want to raise from. And like even today, we have a call with one of our business lawyers later to talk through options on like how to structure it so that we can build a few more tap rooms and invest a little bit more in our wholesale team. So I think right now we're thinking probably $3 to $5 million raise. But it's a really challenging environment right now. So
Both to run the business and to raise money, I
Yeah.
think, because for basically since we started the business, craft beer acquisition activity has been very
the opposite.
soft.
Yeah.
And that isn't too worrying in the sense that our business is more brick and mortar based. It's not a traditional, just taking a multiple of how many barrels you're brewing times $1,000 to get your valuation. But the bigger we grow, the more complicated it might be for an acquirer. However, there's no guarantee in this market that would happen. So our job, our responsibility to ourselves and our investors is to make the business as stable and profitable as it can be. And we believe that if the right opportunity comes up to exit, that will just, bolster the amazing brand we've built and reputation we've built and distribution network and network of tap rooms. But if that doesn't happen, that is what's going to get us to a point where we can either start paying dividends or consolidating the debt that we do have, and also just making it a place where, like, so many breweries are closing that I've had employees tell me, I'm just happy that I know I'll have a job in 6 months, because there are other breweries who have shut down at the drop of a hat and their friends are losing their jobs. So you know, we do believe that taking care of our people and ourselves will
Yeah.
pay back in non-monetary dividends, but in like the stabilization of
Loyalty.
the business and great quality product going out the door. So that's our plan. I also think LeAnn and I are at a point where we see the traction we've been able to get. I'm really proud of us. I know we've done a really good job, but we were not professional restaurateurs, nor brewers, nor wholesale pioneers. But when I see other brands growing faster or broader or in a different way than we have, I'm like, I want to do that. I know we're capable of doing that. And so I think there's a inherent competitiveness that comes from both of our backgrounds, or we're like, I would be so furious if another brewery had our concept and did it
Yeah.
and encroached on our territory. That's the only time I feel maybe territorial with other breweries, is like,
Yeah.
we need to get that tap room on the, not going to name the neighborhood, I'm just kidding, uptown, sooner than later before someone else does.
Yeah.
An Upper West Side tap room would be, I feel like it would fit well there.
We've been looking for like 4
Years.
years. So there's not a lot of inventory, but stay tuned.
We'll stay tuned. I'm curious about, because yeah, just in knowing of the brand and researching for this, like I was so impressed at how quickly you've opened the new tap rooms. Like it just seems like such a daunting thing, particularly in New York. And you mentioned like optimizing the operations of the tap rooms, and I'm just curious, like what that looks like. Like what is it that you learned in Cobble Hill that you're then able to apply to the West Village, be it in like finding the space or in just like how you run it? Like what are some of those things that get easier each time you open a new tap room?
We really created a blueprint here. And I think that comes from our business training of like, we need to have an SOP for everything, for how to open the bar, for what to put on the plates, for what the staff needs to wear, for, you know, the floor plan and how to work Toast. So Toast is our point of sale system. And I think all of that infrastructure with like literally the technology platforms that are supporting you, as well as the furniture you're going to buy, the partners you're going to use to build out the spaces, the job postings you're going to post and when you're going to post them, and the type of people you're going to hire. All of that just gets easier as we go. And the more tap rooms we opened, the easier it's been for me to manage them, in the sense of one bad day or one bad employee leaving or one bad review is less consequential. It's still incredibly important to retain your employees, to have great customer experiences and feedback, of course. But when we just had Williamsburg and it would rain on a Saturday, you're like, oh my God, that's 5% of our month's revenue out the door.
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
if it rains on Saturday, at least we know West Village will be busy, because West Village is always busy. At least we know that week that Bryant Park, which their busy days are Wednesday and Thursday, are not going to be impacted by the rain. And now that we've grown our private event business, that creates a huge hedge against all of the factors that you don't think about when you're building, you know, when you're coming from the New York Times and Google, which is like weather and subway shutdowns and parades. Parades screw over Bryant Park, you know, 5 weekends of the year. So it's really, at this point, I'm almost itching to open more locations, because I'm like, we have such a good wealth of knowledge between the two of us, but also we have an incredible pipeline of staff where now, you know, we'll hire an entry-level taproom manager who's working 3 or 4 days a week, and they'll get promoted after a year, and then eventually they become a GM. And it's like, we don't need to hire new people. We're creating a pipeline of talent. Same thing with the brewery. We don't need to hire as many fresh people, because we have people from front of house in Williamsburg who want to move on to the brewing side, or a entry-level person in the brewery who wants to move up. And um you know, the people economics, it's really expensive to have churn, and you lose a lot of knowledge, that, you know, in-house knowledge. So that's what I think has been the upside. The downside is that we spent a lot of money on spaces, and now with the knowledge we have 5 tap rooms in, I think we can do it for a lot less money and in a really effective way. And that's another thing I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Same thing with expanding distribution. In the past, it felt like such a heavy lift to brew more beer, to partner with a new distributor. We've onboarded with 2 new distributors this year, Northern New Jersey and Southeastern Pennsylvania. And now it's like you kind of ripped off the Band-Aid of going through that process where now we've seen what works to get traction in those new territories. I feel like we have even more confidence that if we onboarded a new distributor, we'd be able to knock it out of the park from the beginning instead of like, oh, let's see how it goes.
Block
Let's not
grant.
invest too much time in them because they might not invest too much in time in us. But I think we did the right thing, which was focused on our flagship and our home base, which is New York City, for the first, 4 or 5 years of this business.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. We're going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to jump into a lightning round if that works.
Sure.
So, what has been the biggest surprise thus far in creating and building this business?
I think our relationship has been really surprising because we started as acquaintances, friends, colleagues, and we have seen each other through a lot of life, really, really challenging life things, really, really challenging business moments, scary things. And all of my friends who want to start a business now want a co-founder because they don't want to do it alone. It's already a lonely journey, even for us. Even having each other, it can feel lonely. And they're like, how did you do it? How did you find each other? And that was just so serendipitous. But also, I think we really work on our relationship. We don't let what's going on with the business come into, or what's going on in our personal lives really interfere with the combined mission that we have together, which is like, we need to see this business succeed for ourselves, for our families, for our team members, for our investors. And we have to put our ego aside. Like, if one of us makes a mistake, I actually think I'm way more forgiving with LeAnn than with my husband. Like, I'll be like, that's your fault. But with her, I'm just like, okay, we got to get over this. We're going to move forward and troubleshoot. And I think that's really our secret sauce, because I've seen a lot of brands come up in the last few years that clearly seem created in some sort of lab, even before AI, very soulless companies that don't have that driving force behind them. On one hand, I think anyone can start a business. It's like anyone could run a marathon if you really put your mind to it. But I don't want to discount that I think our relationship is really special, and we wouldn't have been able to build this business without each other.
For me, what's really rewarding is running into people or coming across people who know who I am or who know our product and have personal stories about how or why they love what we've built, especially when I have no idea who the person is. So, I always kind of dreamt about living in New York, mostly because of Sex and the City. But to be able to now be in this city and have things like plant our flag across the city and be a brand that, like, I don't know, maybe 3% of New Yorkers know about is like very cool and very humbling. And we have moments like that all the time where, like, I'll be on the subway wearing a Talea jacket and they'll be like, oh, I love that beer. It's like, okay, tell me more. And that's just, it's a little bit surreal that we've built something. Now our revenue's it'll be over 10 million this year. And so it's like, people have valued what we built enough to spend $10 million worth of
Or to
money
get
on
married
it,
here,
or to get married here, or have
like
their,
seek us out on their one trip to New York City.
yeah, I think. And that's kind of what we both love, is this like physical product in this space that people can feel connected to. I think no matter what happens with the company, being able to say we created that is really meaningful.
Incredible. Okay, let's do a lightning round. What has been the worst experiment, if you've had any flavors that just have not worked out at all?
A stout with raspberry.
That sounds good. That's actually really
It does sound
surprising.
good to me too. Yeah.
I don't know if there was something wrong with the base stout or the fact that the acidity from the raspberry just really clashed with the maltiness of a stout.
Interesting.
Um, I would say we made a wine-inspired IPA, I think our first year, and ended up like 9%, and it was the highest ABV we've ever brewed. But what we've learned is that there's a person for every beer, and there's a beer for every person. And for months, we would get people saying, "When are you bringing back Blush IPA?" And I was like, "Newsflash, never." But don't yuck my yum. You know what I mean?
Oh my God.
Okay, next question. Who is a dream collaborator or a dream ingredient to work with in the future?
I would love to. We're hopefully doing something with matcha soon. I think saffron would be really fun to brew with also. My dream collaborator would be Amy Schumer or Mindy Kaling.
Ooh.
Amazing.
I would love to do a collaboration with a heritage clothing brand like Ralph Lauren or J. Crew. Just I don't know what that beer would be, but something like that.
Something classic.
Yeah.
Just throw Amy Schumer and some J. Crew and call it a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be your dream location to open a tap room in outside of New York?
Spain.
Yeah, I was thinking like south of France, even though like probably not, but we talk about Miami a lot.
Somewhere warmer.
Somewhere warm. San Diego.
Do you think?
Yeah, San Diego.
That'd be good.
If I could live in Coronado for the rest of my life, I would.
Who wouldn't?
Mm.
Okay, last question. What advice would you give to anybody today starting either a food and beverage company or just any company broadly?
Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress.
And mine would be no one will ever love or care about your company as much as you will.
Excellent advice. Tara and LeAnn, thank you both so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it. Do you want to tell listeners where they can find your beer?
Wait, do you want to know the unit economics of our beer?
We would love to. We would love to know the unit economics of your beer.
It's pretty I mean the secret's going to be out. I'll just give gross margins. Gross margins on our draft beer and our tap rooms are about 96%. Gross margins on our wholesale is more like 45%.
And so the 45%, like let's say at Trader Joe's, they buy it, and then do they take the kind of the difference between the tap room margin and 45%, or is that also like the distribution and kind of the all-in cost of getting it to Trader Joe's?
Those are like our margins, and then distributors usually take a 30% markup, and then the retailers mark it up anywhere from 25 to 35%, depending on the retailer.
Got it. Makes sense. So people should come to the tap room.
It's the most helpful for us, but 75% of our volume is wholesale, so that's also critical for us too.
But 75% of our revenue is in the tap room. So
yeah. It's all important.
Yes.
Amazing.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. You can find Talea Beer at one of their many tap rooms across New York City, or you can use the beer finder at TaleaBeer.com to find Talea locally if you're in New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.